So I will stop the recording at the end of the presentation so that you can feel freer about what you say. So without any further introduction from me, Dan, take it away.
Well, thank you, Larry. I appreciate that introduction. My name is Dan Hill, and today we are going to present Alta Via Consulting's quote and margin price calculator. I have with me today Duan Jacobs, who was also a consultant at Alta Via Consulting, and he will actually show a demo of the margin price calculator. I'm going to do a little preliminary introduction stuff. Now, since this is a resource consumption accounting webinar, I feel I should at least touch on resource consumption accounting. Now, resource consumption accounting really rests on two pillars. One of those pillars is the German cost management system known as GPK. It's actually been around for quite a while, but GPK tends to focus on cost and capacity planning and marginal analysis. The other pillar that RCA rests on is activity-based costing, with its focus on activities and business processes. So when you take a capacity-focused approach, GPK, and combine that with the process-focused approach, ABC, you get an optimized resource consumption accounting approach to managerial costing. Now, RCA really focuses on internal management decision-making. It's not for external consumption. It integrates operational and finance information. Some of our models only integrate finance, only integrate very big, wide operational type metrics that are they cover a lot of ground, big averages that really don't do a good job of assigning costs. But we do in RCA integrate the operational and the finance information at a granular level. And RCA is also the best approach to satisfy management accounting's causality principle. We're going to be talking about this causality principle a bit as we go through this presentation. All right, Alta Via Consulting has developed a quote and margin price calculator to assist with product pricing and margin management. Now, how the calculator works is it basically just incorporates all the prices and margins of current products and current customers. And the information used in the calculator is really from Alta Via's RCA costing and profitability system known as proEO. And you have a couple of our menu screens there on the right, just to give you little visuals here on this slide. Now, the information used in the calculator aligns with the Institute of Management Accountants Statement on Management Accounting titled Conceptual Framework for Managerial Costing. Now, there are many concepts and constraints when you design cost models covered in the conceptual framework, but one of the most important things it talks about is causality, cause and effect. If you're going to assign cost to a product or to a customer, there needs to be a direct relationship between that cost and the receiving cost object. Cause and effect are causality. So when we calculate prices in the margin price calculator, we only consider causally assigned product and customer costs. However, once you have a price tentatively set, we also provide a factor in the calculator to take a look at what the impacts on the organization is going to be from attributable or non-causal based costs. Now, when we look at products and customers, we want to focus on causal-based costs. And so once we set a price, that price not only has to cover all those causal-based costs, it also has to cover those attributable or non-causal-based costs. So that's why we put a factor in there to show what the impact will be on the organization after we take into account the non-causal-based costs. But here again, the setting of the price and the analysis is all done with causal-based information. Okay, now what do we do with the margin price calculator? Well, it helps us set prices for new products, new customers, repricing existing customers, possibly repricing existing products. And here again, we do that by taking a look at current pricing, costing, and margins of products and customers. Now, the calculator really does support margin management because there's a focus on contribution margin, which includes proportional costs, and gross margin, which includes proportional and fixed costs. And you can sort of see the distributions here on the left-hand side for the contribution and for the gross margin. And these are almost normal distributions here. We're going to talk about that in just a moment as well. Okay, let's take a look at those calculations again real quick. The pricing guidance is in the model, in the pricing model, is both at the contribution margin and the gross margin level. The contribution margin is calculated at price per unit less proportional costs gives you your contribution margin. Your gross margin, on the other hand, is your price per unit less your proportional costs and less your fixed costs to give you the gross margin. Now keep in mind these proportional and fixed costs are causally based when you assign them here to the contribution and the gross margin. And I said once we finish this analysis, we do account for those attributable or non-causal based costs, but that's not included in the contribution margin or the gross margin. All right, the last thing I want to cover before we actually get into a demonstration of the margin price calculator is let's talk about statistics here for just 1 second. We make extensive use of a normal distribution and the statistical calculations and results that come from normal distributions within the margin price calculator. Now, what we have here on the right is a perfectly normal distribution, as you can see. I'm not a very good artist here. And this is displayed in a histogram, where you've got a count here on the left-hand side of the vertical axis. The horizontal axis is the measures value slotted into bins. So with a good normal distribution, your midpoint is going to be your mean or your average. And then within 1 standard deviation, you should have 68.2% of your sample size occurrences. Within 2 standard deviations, you've got 95.4%. And then within 3 standard deviations, you've got 99.7% of your observations. However, it is important to note that these relationships and these results only are true if you have a normal or a semi-normal distribution. So that's why it's very important within the margin price calculator that we be sure that the contribution margin is a normal or almost normal distribution, so that statistical calculations will work and will make sense. All right, at this point, I am going to stop sharing the screen. We are going to have a live demonstration of the quote and margin price calculator. This is going to be presented by Duan Jacobs, also of Alta Via Consulting. I'm going to stop sharing the screen. Duan, if you would like to start sharing, and take it away.
Thank you, Dan. Let me share my screen here. Okay, see my screen?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, proEO has multiple desktops and tools for analysis. We utilize Tableau for this demonstration, but our backend database can connect to any of your current BI applications. And for now, these desktops kind of just serve as a template to help you answer some of your questions. So for this demo, we'll look at this decision support tile here, which deals with profit maximization, pricing, and manufacturing optimization. Now, going to the margin calculator, on the top left, you'll notice our filters. We've pre-selected them just to save some time. We utilize version to do variance analysis between actual and target numbers, standard filter, months, which can be grouped for days or quarters over here, and then products and customers, which can be plotted geographically and grouped by region in some of our other desktops. Further below that, we have the min and max transaction volumes, and then a data slider below that, which we can filter these by. So let's set a volume from 100,000 to 500,000. And our chart on the top right, you'll notice, shows much better distribution. The primary graph we'll use to determine the margins is a contribution margin distribution graph at the top right here. It shows the count of customers that fall within these contribution margin bins along this x-axis. Notice that each block displayed in these charts are a specific customer. And this applies to every single one of these charts. If we circle customers, we can see the charts adjust as well as the calculator. And at the bottom here, you can see the amount of records we've just selected. We can also adjust the bin size down here if we want to see a different distribution. Now on the bottom left is the actual calculator divided into contribution margin and gross margin. We have selectable here as a mean cost or a base cost for custom entries. So you'll notice if I select base cost, whatever I enter in here will just calculate through. But we recommend using the mean cost. Now, mean cost plus our contribution margin per unit or gross margin per unit, plus any of these deviations gives us a basic price minus cost to get these estimated margin-based price here. And then finally, the entity margin percentage below here is a catch-all hurdle rate to encompass trivial costs that might be too costly to itemize. Now, notice here, you'll see this mean cost that's outlined in orange. This relates to these two graphs on the right here as well. Similar thing with this line outlined in blue here. You'll see the 12 cents relates to the mean contribution margin, 12 cents over here. Now, we'll see the indicators show a positive margin down here, but let's see if we reduce the price by negative 0.3 standard deviations from 17 cents to 13 cents. So you'll see our margin-based price is 13 now. You'll see we're still positive in terms of profitability. But if you look at our distribution over here, these might be some outliers. So let's see if we remove these outliers, if it shows something different. So I'll just select them, and then when you hover over, you have that option to exclude these specific customers. So when I excluded those customers, our entity margin percentage hurdle rate down here of 15% shows that we're suddenly at a negative 13.7% gross margin loss. So when we add in all those costs that we didn't itemize, we're losing money at this 11 cents price. But once again, if you look, our contribution margin is still positive. So what this means is we might be able to make up this margin with volume. Now, once again, if we further reduce this price by negative 1.5 deviations, you'll see we're at negative 10% contribution margin here, which simply put means there's no way we can make up this loss in volume because it's costing us essentially more to manufacture these things than we sell them for. So let's just keep it at negative 0.3 deviations here, a price of 11 cents. Now, all of these decisions are based on how good the data set is. On the next page, we can further kind of refine this data set. So this page has all the filters that's connected on the first page. So all of our selections here transfer over. If we change anything here, it'll change on the first page. We have a few more distributions here, including quantity. We also have the min and max of each of these measures. So you'll see these distributions, some of them look pretty good. But notice down here, if we look at our contribution margin per unit, this is not distribution, this is simply the cost over quantity. And we have a customer here that has a negative contribution margin. If we click on this point, you'll notice it highlights it across all of these graphs. And at the bottom left here, you'll notice it's not displayed, even down to the 5th decimal. So if we remove this customer, we can click here and just type in 529 and unselect this customer. We further refine our data set. Now going back to the calculator, we've removed this customer, we removed some of these outliers. We're closer at a negative 6.7% entity margin here compared to the 13 before. Now this 12 cents per unit, why would I reduce this deviation by negative 0.3? Well, the main reason is when you look at these graphics, our distributions and everything seems pretty good. But at the bottom here, our price per unit, so what we're currently essentially selling these things to our customers for, majority of them fall within this 12 cents bin. So at 12 cents, at this 12 cent margin price, we're essentially losing money if we don't have a firm grasp on our costs. Now, if we're at, say, closer to 13 cents, you can see, okay, now we're starting to make money in a hole. Now we can keep going, changing values, but this is the basics of how you could manipulate data within this margin calculator to get a better understanding of pricing by looking at distributions and filtering out really these outliers for these specific ranges of quantities. Now this has limitations, but it's one part of many tools we use to develop a better understanding. But it all starts with really understanding your costs and having a firm grasp on all the resource consumptions and modeling these costs. And that is it for the live demo. Dan, give him back to you.
All right, thank you, Duan. I will start sharing my screen again. There we go. All right, good job. I appreciate that, Duan. That was a great demonstration of our actual margin price calculator. Now I'd like to talk about a couple other things, some limitations of this approach. Well, first, this approach does not consider product value as perceived by the customer. Now, setting prices is a bit of a science, but it's also a bit of an art. We need to understand how our customers perceive the prices we set on our products and perceive the value they get from that price and the quality of the product. The approach used here also does not consider competitor prices or industry trends. We always want to think about what our competitors are doing and what the industry in general is heading towards. Now, as in any good information system, this approach's output is only as good as the information that is put in. Garbage in, you're going to get garbage out. That's why it's really important we use solid RCA causal-based costing information as the inputs to the margin price calculator. And that way we are going to get our best output results. Now, since we do make extensive use of normal distributions, we also recommend that the margin price calculator not be used with sample sizes of 30 or smaller. And that's just an attempt to make sure that the statistical calculations and relationships hold.
Sorry, Dan, can you just, we're seeing your note screen here.
Oh, I'm so sorry. My apologies. Can you see the limitations of approach now?
Yes.
Okay, so sorry, everyone. Got myself a little confused there. Real quick, just the limitations approach that I went through. It does not consider the product values perceived by the customer. We don't consider competitor prices or industry trends, garbage in, garbage out. And of course, we want to look at sample sizes of 30 or smaller to make sure the statistical calculations and relationships hold. Okay, so what about fixed costs? We've talked a lot about contribution margin, which only includes proportional costs, and gross margin, which includes proportional and fixed costs. The margin price calculator really provides both. However, when we're looking at an incremental sales proposal, if the incremental sales or the incremental volumes from this sale are going to be so much that we're going to have to make some fixed asset investments, such as investments in equipment or investments in personnel, we need to understand those additional fixed cost expenses before we actually try to sit down and set a price. All right, why the proEO margin price calculator? Well, only RCA's causally assigned costs can serve as the basis for decisions about resources, products, and services. If you don't have accurate marginal information, it's very difficult to make good decisions to maximize profit. Another point is the margin price calculator does not suffer from the fluctuating unit fixed cost problem like you have with activity-based costing. And lastly, the margin price calculator demonstrates that product costs and profitability can vary by customer usage and behavior. This last point is really rather important to me. I think a lot of people think in terms of products and customers as sort of being separate entities, that this is my product cost and my product profitability. I'll go and look at my customers and their customer costs and customer profitability. But in reality, when you're looking at product costs, what you're actually looking at is an average of the cost of that product across all your customers, because your customers customers are going to use that product differently. Their behavior is not going to be the same, and therefore the cost to your organization are not going to be the same. So you really want to keep in mind that your customer costs are going to affect your product costs. I'm sorry, your customer behaviors are going to affect your product costs. And you see that vividly within the margin price calculator. It really drives home that point that your product costs and your product profitability truly can vary by customer behavior. All right, at this point, I want to hand the presentation back over to Larry so we can open up a question and answer session.